Hi, I'm Rick Harlow. I'm here today to talk to you about doing some small-scale tree pruning. What we have next to us here is a pineapple guava, Fahoa celowiana, or sometimes called Aca celowiana. This is a tree that's most commonly purchased as a shrub, and whenever you are thinking about a tree, it's something that evolves over time. Rarely do we find these in a large scale already as a tree. We have to train these as they grow. And sometimes I think this is the best kind of tree pruning because it's something that forces you to think about the character of the tree, the form of the tree, and these kinds of things. This is a great tree because it's small scale, never gets any taller than 20 feet. It has flowers which are fading now and starting to become fruit. The flower petals are edible. The fruit is edible. It doesn't produce so much fruit that you're overwhelmed at any one time with fruit, so it's a good ornamental that has some of the benefits of having some fruit and things. The petals, when they're first forming, are real pretty pink petals, and you can actually pop those off and eat them, and some people put those in salads. So what we want to do before we get started is talk a little bit about the tools that we would be using. I've got a pair of bypass pruners. Any kind of bypass pruners will work fine. It's always good to have a holster so that you can keep them right next to you. I've got some loppers, and these are for branches that are bigger than 1/2 of an inch. And then I've got obviously a hand saw, and we probably won't be using these two very much at all today. These are for larger branches, of course, and most of what we're going to be able to do today is right on the ground, just taking care of some of the problems of the tree. Before we get to it, one of the things I wanted to mention is whenever we approach a shrub or a tree or a vine or anything, we always want to ask ourselves the question, why? Why am I here? What is my purpose? What is my intent for being here pruning? There needs to be an objective. And the objective here would be to start to form this kind of large bush into something that looks a little bit more like a tree. Take care of the architectural problems of this and form it into a small scale tree. So it's been pruned once, probably about 3 years ago, when it was probably about waist high, and now it's up as tall as I am, and it's time to start thinking about forming this into more of a tree. So what we're going to be doing is going after architectural problems with this tree, crossing branches, rubbing branches, branches that are growing towards the center, branches that are growing straight down. And if we remove these problems of the tree, we'll find that we have already formed a much more appealing, healthy tree just by taking out what doesn't work. So here's a crossing branch. So this is a great example. So if we were to follow this branch out, we would see that this is getting in this guy's getting into this guy's territory, and they're crossing. So as these get older, those will always be in place. And look, you've got one right here that's just laying on top of the other one. Here's another example of crossing branches here. So these are competing for real estate. And then we have a great example of what we call parallel branches. Parallel branches are kind of doing the same job, you know, they're kind of repeating the same task, and usually parallel branches, if left alone, become crossing branches. And so those are things that we would want to deal with. Branches growing towards the inside of the tree. Here's a classic example of that right here. So here's a branch starting right here, and it's heading right towards the center of the tree. This creates a real kind of a confusing thicket-like a look inside your tree, and kind of alleviates that ability to be able to see the branching structure of the tree. We have examples here and here of branches that are heading right towards the ground. And so when we're thinking about trees, we're trying to alleviate that kind of look. You know, so there's things that we talk about when we're pruning trees to the point of being monotonous. architectural problems. We'll always talk about that. So if you're worried about what to do, it's much easier to find what's wrong with the tree and deal with that. And usually what's left behind it, the result of dealing with what's wrong with the tree, you have a nicely formed tree. But it's also really important to make sure that we're dealing with big branches first. So we're looking at the architecture and the form of the bigger branches, these that are on the inside here. We're looking at these first to see if there's any of these that can be improved upon, because what we don't want to do is fuss with smaller things and realize that the whole branch needed to be taken off, so we're wasting time on details. So bigger to smaller, always the protocol, and then taking care of what's wrong with a tree. Here we have some crossing branches, right? And so when we're dealing with that, we're trying to think, okay, well, which one of these stays and which one goes? Okay, my thinking is that this branch, which is kind of going straight up and then flopping out into the canopy, is probably a good candidate for removal. And if I look at it here, if we take this whole branch off, this smaller branch that's growing towards the inside will be taken care of as well. So the bottom line is that this branch I'm wiggling now will stay on the tree, and then this one will go. Okay, so I'm going to come in here and I'm going to go all the way down to where it joins, and I'm going to take it off. Okay, now I'm left with parallel branches, and so we can see that in this situation we've got 1, 2, 3 branches that are kind of taking off in the same direction. This one's kind of on its own. What I would typically do in a situation like this is take out the middle one, leaving this one and this one to have their own space. Okay, and then look, let's go around and see if we can find any more examples of, here's a branch right here that it's just a little guy, and it's kind of coming up straight up and then coming over here and bumping into this main branch here. So this would be a candidate for removal here. Dead branches, ones that are dried and dead, have probably been shaded out over time. Those are always candidates for removal. So we see, anytime we go in there and we see dead branches, if I look in here and I wiggle this thing growing towards the center, take this one out. Okay, we're getting into some competing or parallel branches here. This one's kind of growing straight up. We want it to grow out and up. So we start taking these out. We instantly are exposing crossing branches here. So sometimes when you're pruning, you prune out one thing and you expose another problem that was right underneath, and this happens all the time. Now it's important, one of the things I'd want to say is that when I'm asking students to prune young trees like this, where they really have to think about it, we break them up into groups of 2 or 3, and they have to talk about each cut that they do. And sometimes they get so bogged down with that decision that it becomes an endless kind of torturous process. And it's good to bring out the point that, you know, as long as you're keeping these rules and these things about looking for problems, sometimes you might make a mistake. Sometimes you might take out the wrong one, and everything's going to be fine. So we want to make sure that we keep these in mind, but we don't get too bogged down with these choices. So we still have crossing going on here. So if I'm wiggling these things, I'm seeing where they go, what they're doing. This is a real confusing area right here. Do you see this? So we've got a double fork. This is forking here. And so we have to kind of figure, well, what part of this is the most appropriate. So sometimes I'll wiggle these. I see how they interact with each other. Sometimes it's something that's almost automatic if you've been doing it a long time. So I'm gonna come back and take this guy off. And of course that exposes some other issues in here. So obvious, when it's dead, it's time to take it out. We got some competition going on here. This is getting pretty confusing in here. We've got forks that are crossing each other here, so there's all kinds of confusion. So sometimes it comes down to just opening that up. Again, this is something that's important to point out. You know, sometimes when I'm in here and I'm looking in these things and wiggling these branches and I make a cut right away afterwards, I think, oh, maybe that wasn't the right one. Maybe I should have thought about it a little longer. And in many cases, as long as you're following the basic rules, even if it wasn't the perfect choice, it's a choice that's following those rules and you'll be okay in the end. This one's kind of growing down. We kind of, as a tree, we try to skirt things up a little bit so we don't have things touching the ground so much. This one's going towards the ground, as is this one. We've got this is a classic crossing situation here. See this? So we have to make a call. I'd try to keep the big guy in place. Take out this smaller one here. Cut at this fork here. We have one going towards the ground and one that's going up a little more. I'll take the one going towards the ground off. This branch is just starting to get shaded out way down here. So this is a good candidate to just remove altogether. And I'm wondering if this down here might not be a little far down as well. Okay. Here's one growing towards the center of the tree. So we'll take that one out. And then down at the very bottom here, this is what's called the sucker. See this? This is a sucker. And now suckers come are one of those things that we associate with stress. There's only one sucker here. I just think it's an opportunist. And so suckers definitely come off. So we'll take that off. That way we can see this really cool looking bark, and it'll start to look a little bit more like a tree. Here's a classic. Look at this one's coming up here, coming down and dropping below here and getting all involved over here. So take that guy out. Here's one growing towards the center. We have to start thinking about the 1/3 rule, which is never remove more than 1/3 of the foliage at any one time. So it's always okay to walk away. So we're almost to that point now. So if I look back, come back and look at this tree, seems like there's a few branches that are a little out of place, like this one. I think we're pretty good. Trying to keep these potential future collisions from happening, but I think we're pretty good. So it looks like it took us about 18-20 minutes to prune this tree. If you look around at the base, there's a little bit of debris. We never want to take more than 30% out. You're starting to see the branches a little bit more, and one of the things we forget about with trees is the branching structure is just as an important of a component as just about anything else. In fact, if you were to think about how they show off landscapes, low voltage lighting at nighttime, what you're uplighting is the branching structure of trees. So having an opportunity to see the center of the tree a little bit, see this kind of cinnamon colored bark, this crackly bark, starting to look a little bit more like a tree. I could definitely go around and find more things to take off, but we're trying to follow the golden rule and not take off any more than 30%, and it'll always be there coming down the line, so we can come back later.